A little bit of a heads up for you now, if you've got little ones in the room. I mean, terrible timekeeping if it's 13 minutes past 8 if they're up, but I know that it's half term, they might be knocking around, and also you might be a little bit of a sensitive disposition, and we're going to be talking about police work now. I'll try and keep it as, I guess, sanitised as I can, considering it's such a big subject, but I'm just flagging it for you. Anyway, last summer I met a really impressive man called David Swindle. I was lucky enough to interview him a couple of times about his career as a senior police officer in Police Scotland, Strathclyde Police, if I'm honest, if I'm exact. Pretty sure he actually met the real Taggart a couple of times, but we'll have to ask him about that. I heard all about his big cases in his 34-year career, which includes the Glasgow airport terrorist attack to the awful murder of Angelica Cluck. Now, you may not remember her name, as is so often the way with victims, but it was actually David's investigation of her murder that led to the joined-up thinking, which eventually caught the serial killer Peter Tobin. Now, David has since left the force, but I feel like maybe we shouldn't use the word retirement because he's still pretty busy. He's gone on to review investigations. He works with the families of people who went missing or died abroad. He has a hugely busy media schedule, and now he's on tour with a kind of an evening with event called Makings of a Murderer. It's coming to the Cambridge Corn Exchange in May. David, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I guess you're used to doing a lot of work at unsociable hours, so 8:15 in the evening, not unusual for you to be thinking about work.
No, I mean, like yourself and other people in the media industry, it never stops the type of stuff I do. So, yes, thanks for the introduction there, Louise. It was the CrimeCon true crime event in London that I first met you. I knew who you were before, and I remember you actually facilitated a couple of things that I was speaking about.
Yeah, that's right.
A couple of presentations. That's the CrimeCon event, and I think that was the first big event in the UK. And there was about 2,000 people at it, just after the pandemic, I think it was, or during it.
It was, which makes me sort of think, when you're doing events like that, and you're doing media appearances and podcasts, all of which we'll get onto, when you started out as a young PC, and I'm not going to take you back to the exact year, I'll save your blushes, but I cannot imagine a young copper in Strathclyde, in whenever that was, would ever have foreseen a career path where they had one of the biggest murder investigations that Scotland's seen.
And the UK, yes.
And the UK. Yeah, you're right, actually, it was a huge case, wasn't it? And then has gone on to have a podcast series and write books and have this hugely prolific, I guess, celebrity career. I mean, I guess, young David would never have foreseen that.
Yeah, I mean, when I started out as a young officer, I mean, there's no way I could ever have seen that. And I could never envisage how it gone when I got into the police, how it developed, and the magnitude of the high-profile cases that you speak about. And, and now life after the police, when I'm doing, and we'll come on to the victims abroad stuff, how that comes about. But no, I could never imagine it. I've done everything you mentioned there. I do the podcast, I've got the Makings of a Murderer show, I do quite a lot of media stuff, I go to true crime events where I meet yourself, and I do radio interviews. The one I haven't done is written a book. You mentioned book. I haven't written a book. Are you
sure about that? I feel like I've seen your name on a... Well, do you know what? Publishers listening, you know what to do. I know that we sort of, when I interview interesting people, we do tend to go off on tangents. I really want to ask you, what makes a good police officer, David? And has it changed from when you started out to what makes a good police officer now? Because the world has changed so much.
Well, the world has changed so much, as we can see just now with the social media and other things that are happening. I mean, I joined the police, and I won't hide it, Louise. I was 1977. I joined the police in what would be perceived as the Gene Hunt, the Taggart days, the old school policing. Yeah. And I joined the police then, 1977. I was a science technician, senior technician at the top of my game at 22, and I joined the police for a challenge. And I got a challenge. And, I was fortunate, I persevered, I pushed. But what makes a good policeman, what makes a good copper, put it that way, dedication, integrity, trustworthy, you're empathetic, compassionate, organised, you want to accept change, and there's so much change goes on. And someone that doesn't accept the obvious and prepared to challenge. One thing I get asked quite a lot, and you probably preempted one of your questions, is how do you cope? And people ask me that when I'm speaking at events. Every career's got its challenges, and no more so in the police. And, it's professional and personal commitment. And you mentioned earlier, working long hours. I mean, I remember, and, these... in fact, when I left the police, I don't use, as you said, that word retired. Someone said to me, when your telephone rings in the middle of the night, it's not to tell you that there's a sad event, that there's someone been murdered. It's to a family member or whatever. And that is the big thing. And the police, it's people always ask, I've got a relative that's interested in joining the police. Should they join? Absolutely. It's one of the best jobs that you can get with so much variety. And there's ups and downs. There's good days, there's bad days, there's long hours, there's stresses, there's personal life issues, there's frustrations when stuff doesn't work out, cases aren't resolved. There's constant media scrutiny and social media scrutiny even more so just now. So there's highs and lows. And somebody's arrested, it's great, convicted at court, and then there's the lows when you don't solve. So it's a challenging job. It's a job that, like every job, like your job, like everybody's job, people that are listening, we've all got challenges, we've all got stresses. But in the police, it is sometimes difficult to switch. In fact, it's very difficult to switch off because you never forget. You never forget seeing the horrors of murder victims and having to deal with victims' families and having to deal with the horrible killers.
I was going to ask you what success looks like, because a lot of police work, I would guess, is all too often reactive, right? A crime happens, you're called in. Sometimes, though, police work is preventative and you will never know what you stopped from happening. And I wonder how you define success. Is it helping a survivor of a crime get a normal life back, get back on their feet? Or is it always the perpetrator is found and put in prison?
Oh, no, it's a mixture. It's a mixture. I mean, I was... one of the other roles I had was the head of public protection. So I was the head of public protection for what was Strathclyde Police, and I was involved in bringing what was called MAPA into Scotland, the multi-agency public protection arrangements, where people sit around a table, people from the social services, people from health, the prison, the police, and look at a dangerous individual. So that is early intervention, trying to stop people, identify early criminals and trying to put them on a path. So I was involved in that. I was involved in sort of proactive policing or in a proactive crime team where you were targeting the criminals. So, the police moved on a lot. Probably, in 1997, they were always reacting. Now they've got like proactive teams. They're proactively targeting. They're proactively looking at things, early intervention. So the police and society have moved on a lot over the years. So you're not just sitting waiting for, here's the report coming in. They're proactive.
I know there is a big case at the moment that everyone is focusing on, and I'm not going to ask you about it because I think I know you well enough to know that you are not one of these ransom quote police officers. I don't want to be speculating on something that is affecting a family and a community. But the Nicola Bulley case is showing how much policing has changed in terms of social media. Do you think that there's ever a good place for the public to be helpful? And I'm talking the olden days of Crime Watch, right, when we were actually contributing to your work
Crime
as opposed
Watch.
to...
Louise, bring back Crime Watch.
Yes,
BBC,
honestly.
Bring back Crime Watch because I'll tell you something. Crime Watch was responsible for filling the Peter Tobin. When I created Operation Anagram to look at Tobin's life, and we ended up identifying his other victims in Kent and Margate in Kent, Crime Watch was the repository. Rav Wilding, the team that were there, and we would go on and appeal at night time. I know they have a daytime Crime Watch, but the launch of The Makings of a Murderer the other week there was in the Lowry in Manchester, in Salford, and I actually said, we're in Media City, bring back Crime Watch. And, it's a success of it. And that is the thing. But what you're saying, and yes, you know me well enough and you know where I stand with integrity. And I get a lot of people, I've had quite a few media outlets contacting me regarding a particular case that's ongoing just now. Yeah. And I've got a policy, and our policy is quite clear. When I left the police and was doing independent reviews, my policy is I do not comment on ongoing live UK cases or investigations. And, the reckless speculation that goes on by so-called experts most of them who haven't been SIOs, senior investigating officers, has caused can cause irretrievable damage to live investigations and to families, and the work been done by the family liaison officers and other experts. So, I mean, the true crime community I'm part of that. I'm involved in it. The cases that I do, the murdered abroad, the killed abroad cases, where we're trying to reach the witnesses and get information for cases, people that have been killed in Spain. We rely on that with social media platforms. So yeah, policing's changed over the years, but so has society. So is society, and that is the thing. That is the thing. And yes, you're right. And I don't agree with the reckless speculous. The reckless speculation. For me, I made an informed decision that I wouldn't be a talking head when something like that was. But I'm on TV programmes, as you know, and I always go on these because we should never forget what killers do. We'll never forget what they do to the victims, and we should never forget the victims. And that's the thing.
I think that's so often the case, isn't it? You know, the serial killers, and I'm really conscious that, there's some people who'll be literally staring at the radio or their phone because it's the young generation listening to this, and there'll be some people who'll want to be maybe step back a little bit. So let's not go into it in too much detail for those people for whom it is uncomfortable listening. But let's talk about Tobin a little bit. For the ins and outs of the case, there are some brilliant documentaries on TV that you can find and you can stream. In terms of you, David, what did solving that case mean to you as a police officer who could tell the family of Angelica Cluck and his other victims? Because I know she was your primary victim, wasn't she? It was that case that made you sort of figure out what was going on elsewhere.
Yes, I mean the thing, and again, I'm mentioning the makings of a murderer, which is coming to the Cambridge area, and on that I speak about the other killers, serial killers, people like that, and I speak about, do they have to kill first? But I'm not going to put too much out, because if they want to find out about that, come along to it. And I speak about the Tobin case because that was, for me, was a life-defining moment, personally and professionally. And what happened was, when we eventually established, we found Angelica's body under the church, concealed. We found, the ferocious injuries, what he had done, covered up the scene. I said, he hasn't got to 60 and not killed before. Yeah. So I set up to look at his life, Operation Anagram. And, you're right, there's without getting into too much detail, people can go on and read my website, read the stuff online, and there's been quite a lot of documentaries out there. And, and it explains, there's quite some really good ones that explain how it came about, how we tracked down his life, where he was, how we identified and traced to people that had been missing. Vicky Hamilton, who'd been missing from Scotland, and Dinah McNipple, and found them buried in a garden in Irvine Drive in Margate. So there's a lot there.
It was proper police work, and I know that from our conversations that you've never forgotten that case as a human being, David, frankly. But in terms of your career, when you're an SIO, and then you're a public figure because you're on the news, you're doing press conferences, everyone's gripped by the case. How do you go back to everyday policing after that? I had a variety of roles. I mean, at that time, when I was running that, I was a detective superintendent, so I was senior, and I was dealing with a few of these cases, because during that I dealt with the Glasgow Airport terrorist attack. I was the SIO in Scotland for that. So you're dealing with fast-moving investigations, complex investigations, and at the same time you're running, personnel issues, you're running teams for other things. So you've got an overview. And one thing I always say is, I liken myself to being a football manager. You're only as good as your team surrounding you. And that's what you are as a senior investigating officer. You're making huge decisions, and you're trying to anticipate what comes up, what will come up at the court, what the defence will say. So it's a really challenging role, but there are a lot of other
homicides, murders, where it's Taggart. You mentioned Taggart there. Yes, I did know the real Mark McManus.
Did you?
Yeah.
Can you, as a bit of a gear change, can you tell us a little bit about him?
Mark used to drink in the same pub as us. When I was a DCI, Detective Chief Inspector, in the city centre of Glasgow, and before that, we used to always go to this pub round the corner near the old other TV channel, not your channel.
A competition.
We used to go into the pub, and Mark would be there. And he actually believed that he was the chief inspector. And he would drink in the pub and he would talk about, he was a really good guy, a really nice guy. And they always solved them within an hour, the programme.
Exactly, so, amazing, yeah.
Yeah. But there's quite a few of these programmes, that are tongue-in-cheek, likes of Gene Hunt, likes of the Sweeney. And I was in these days. I was the police in these days, and I have seen what policing was like in these old days when there was none of the sort of PC world that we're in now, how things change, how techniques change. There was no DNA, in the 70s. There was nothing. So I have been, and at 1977, I say I joined the police. A lot of people listening to this, wouldn't be born then. And I was in the police right through, and I left the police in 2011. When I left, it was a highly professional organisation, more publicly accountable, more focused, more joined up, and more proactive. More proactive. And for me, I was 34 years I was in the police, and I stayed on after the Tobin, the Angelica Kloot case and Anagram. I stayed on there to see that through, to try and make sure that we could do as much as we could to help find out anyone else that he killed.
You mentioned the Glasgow terror attack there. A lot of people will think, hang on, you've been a murder SIO and then you're on a terrorist investigation. I'm guessing there are, procedurally quite similar. There'll be kind of a way to look at a crime, or are they hugely different?
Well, that was some a day I will never forget. I'm watching it in a house and watching the car and the airport blowing up and on fire, and then the next thing I know, I'm on the phone, I'm called in to deal with it, and the place is cordoned off. So fast moving. There's I think it's probably on my website, davidswindle.com. I think there's a clipping of a newspaper clipping, and it's me speaking about 10 years after it, organised chaos. And it was. Everything was moving so fast. And we were working, bearing in mind they had tried to do the same at Tiger in London.
Yeah, I remember I was living there at the time.
Motorway, and they came up the way. So, it's there's different skills, there's different stuff involved, but, I was dealing with a huge teams of people round about me, and it's information, it's fast moving, it's reactive. But there's other things, there's public safety stuff, there's other organisations involved which you won't go into on that. And I've worked in a lot of cases over the years, yeah.
I'm conscious of the light and shade often needed when we're having big conversations, and it's not that I'm making light of anything. I think you know me well enough if you're listening, or you, David. But sometimes I think we do need a bit of light and shade. Have you ever seen the Billy Connolly take on the Glasgow airport attack?
I think I've heard about it, but there was a few things round about that were, that became public things on it.
So when we finish our chat, if you could do me the favour before you go and have a cup of tea and watch telly, if you could just search it on YouTube, I think you'll find it very, very, very funny. And that's not to say in any way that it's a humorous topic, but only, what a genius Billy Connolly is. And it is one of those things where he takes an awful thing and finds the humanity in it.
And that's what they do. That's what the comedians do, and they know exactly how to do it. And the thing is that that was purely by chance, that by the stanchion that was on the door, that car didn't go into the airport. Otherwise, there would have been lots of casualties and fatalities, and that's what saved that. So yeah, I mean, I'll look at the Billy Connolly one. I haven't, in fairness, I haven't, but I will look at it after. Yeah.
So I know I kind of chuckled to myself when I said you retired, because you really haven't. You are now spending, I guess, much of your time trying to help the families of people who've gone missing or have died abroad. That must be a really challenging project.
Yeah, what's actually happened with this is I have there's a few. I have a website as well. We've got my own website, David Swindle Crime, just my name, and I have another one called Victims Abroad, victimsabroad.com. Now, there's two particular cases in Spain that I'm working on, and one thing I would accentuate here is that I don't call myself a private investigator, right? And I think we spoke about this before. I'm a reviewer. I'm an independent reviewer and crime expert. And what I'm doing with that is trying to help two families in particular. One's in India as well, which I'm helping with. But the two ones in Spain is the one is Craig Mallon, who was murdered in Lloret de Mar, a single punch murder, and that was 10 years ago. And Craig died, and it was a busy street. If it had been here in the UK, someone would be caught. CCTV, there was no CCTV in that area. There was nothing like that, and it's different procedures, and it's quite confusing because we believe as French people. And the other one is Kirsty Maxwell, and Kirsty died in Benidorm in a balcony in a room, and she died in circumstances that were quite unusual and unresolved. And to be honest, we don't actually know what happened there, and it is very, very confusing. And the police destroyed her clothing and the DNA parts to it. So there's all sorts of stuff. And I've been quite out there with this one, that it's a flawed investigation. Now, what happens is, with this, there's a stance by the British government. They say if the British government do not interfere or try to influence investigations in our country. Right? That's the stance. So families are left to pay for translators, to get lawyers, to find their own way through the justice system.
Yeah.
And the other part I ask is, what does the British government do if the circumstances in investigations into the death of a British citizen, as in Kirsty Maxwell, are seriously flawed? There's no answer. So we continue, there's well-meaning, there's charities. In fact, Kirsty Maxwell's family, and people can see that online, because what we do is we buy, people that are killed, we buy the domain. So we buy like KirstyMaxwell.com, www.KirstyMaxwell.com, run a full social media campaign from it. I've got linguists out in Spain. I've got a couple of team members that live out there. One's English and one's Spanish, and they're fluent in different languages. And they do things like putting posters up, going to see people, CraigMallen.com. So we buy it and put it out there. And social media, you mentioned social media earlier. Social media is important, how you keep pushing these cases. So for families, they don't get the support. And, what I say is, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't have to do this. But if I wasn't there, who would help the likes of these families? And there's loads of others that are in that situation as well. So
how then do you, when you decide that you're going to do a tour, which I'm guessing is kind of the best way to explain it is an evening with, how do you balance the very delicate scales, I guess, of feeding in your stories, your expertise, your repertoire of experience to, I guess, get bums on seats and to share with people's other interests in true crime? And how do you know when it's too raw, it's too private, and you don't want to capitalise off cases? Because that's a difficult balance, I can imagine.
Yeah, well, that's something that I have always been feeling strong about, and you have spoken to me before, interviewed me before, and I don't become involved, and we spoke about that, about the talking head, they'll talk about life things and things like that. And if I become involved in the TV programme, a documentary in the different channels, crime channel, other channels, it's balanced and it's about victims. This show, it is called a show, it's a tour. And, the audiences, the opening one at in the
Lowry,
the Lowry was 1,300 people there.
Goodness me.
There's 1,000 at Darlington, and they're all big sellouts. And it's a real, without getting into all the stuff that's in it, it's not an evening. It's an evening with, I suppose, but it is very focused and structured, and it brings up some of the things that you were asking earlier. And do killers killed? They have to kill before they're caught. And it's, if it wasn't, I mean, I would be able to. I was doing one before, which was a smaller thing, but I would be able to do. It's an organisation called the Entertainers that are behind this.
So they'll make it all happen. Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I mean, I can imagine if I did an evening with Louise Hulland, I wouldn't even know how to even get a theatre. So the content is all down to you.
Content's me, structure. The structure's me. The structure's the balance. With my experience in it, with looking at some really old cases, some unresolved cases, some cases where people are progressing, stuff about early intervention. It's called The Makings of a Murderer. So what makes a murderer? What do they do with the control thing, all that stuff? And yeah, I mean, you've seen the tour schedule. It's quite a heavy schedule.
It really is.
Heavy schedule. Aye.
Yeah. So you're coming to the Cambridge Corn Exchange on Thursday, the 18th of May.
Yes,
tickets are available. You can get them from the Corn Exchange. You do have to be over 18, so don't be buying tickets for a teenager. You've got to be 18 plus. What do you want, David, for people to take away with it? Because I'm guessing, going back to Crime Watch, my broadcasting icon, because my dream programme with the BBC is Crime Watch. And I know...
I'll say it again, bring it back.
Bring it back, I'm on board.
The evening one back.
But, Nick, the wonderful presenter, and his name's completely escaped me, Nick, he used to say... Nick Ross, of course, thank you. He said, don't have nightmares. So I'm guessing when people leave the Corn Exchange after watching your show, you don't want them to be going home feeling that they're at risk round every corner. What do you want people to take away from it?
This is like speaking about, it's the killers, what makes them a learning thing, how it can come about, what they can do, what killers do, how we got, over the years, killers are way back, unsolved cases, solved cases, things that went wrong. As I say, I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but one of the things that I have is there's after it, there's because of the size of these venues, it's impossible to do a question and answer thing, and people go online and they put in questions, and we answer them. I answer them at a time, or the social media team, we get back to them. And I get back to them personally, actually, within the week, and we answer things. And sometimes there's people at these events that are, people that are genuine true crime fans that are there. There's people that are theatre goers that are just going to see what this is like. There's people that, in the last couple of ones, that have been victims, that have been there, and then they maybe speak to me privately. Because after we try to have a sort of meet and greet, it's difficult with huge numbers. And then speak to them, and people contact our social media and ask questions or they share, and and I'm also speaking about the work I do, Life After the Police. I'm speaking about the Victims Abroad stuff as well. So it's a different way to approach it, but it's the balance of the victims. We should never forget the victims. And as you know, there are some TV programmes. There's one in particular that's on a channel, and it over glamorises a particular killer. And there's no balance there for the victim. So The Makings of a Murderer is there's a lot on it. It's fast moving.
Well, David,
are you going to go? Louise?
What do you think the answer to that is, David? Of course I'm going to go.
You've got to go to it. Got to go to it, yeah.
David, you're one of the most interesting people that I've ever had the pleasure of interviewing. I'm so grateful that you've given us such a big chunk of your Wednesday evening. This is a yes or no answer, finally, before I let you go. 11 million people, it's been revealed today, watched Happy Valley. Were you one of them?
No. I didn't watch it. No, I didn't watch it.
We're going to have to talk about this.
Because I'm too busy.
Okay, I'll let you off.
I'm too busy, Louise. I'm too busy, yeah. But no, I a lot of people have spoken to me about it, but sometimes I just don't watch them.
I suppose it makes sense. Yeah. David Swindle, thank you so much for coming on. You can get tickets for The Makings of a Murderer with David Swindle, the Cambridge Corn Exchange. It's the 18th of May. You can get tickets on the phone line, on email, go to the website. I'll probably see you there if I'm honest.